Halloween week special. The town that forgets the dead. A traveler passes through a small town where no one remembers the people buried in the cemetery, because every night the graves are dug up and new names appear on the tombstones, including hers. The rain had been falling for hours, soft and steady, the kind of rain that blurs the horizon until the world feels half awake. The traveler, her name was Nora Vale, had been driving since dawn. She wasn't running from anything, at least not in the obvious sense, just drifting. People like her often tell themselves they're searching for something, a fresh start, a new purpose. But deep down, they're usually trying to escape a memory that clings too tightly. By the time she saw the crooked wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Harlow's Bend," a quiet place to rest, her gas tank was nearly empty. The town looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint or a fresh visitor in decades. The main street was lined with tilted lamp posts, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a single stoplight that switched colors even when no cars passed. The air smelled of wet soil and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. Inside the diner, time seemed slower. A lone waitress greeted Nora with a polite but tired smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everyone inside, the cook, two old men playing cards, a young couple in silence, stopped talking when Nora entered. It wasn't hostility exactly, more like confusion, as if they weren't used to seeing someone new. Or maybe they'd forgotten what new even looked like. Nora ordered coffee, and when she asked where she might find a motel, the waitress pointed vaguely down the road. "You'll see it," she said, "right past the cemetery." Nora paused, her spoon clinking against the cup. "The cemetery?" she repeated. The waitress nodded, eyes drifting toward the rain-streaked window. "Don't worry, hon. It's not like anyone remembers who's buried there anyway." Then she walked away, before Nora could ask what she meant. The words stuck to Nora's mind the whole walk to her car. She didn't know yet that this town held no memories of the dead. She didn't know that by sunrise the cemetery would change, and her name would appear among the graves. The rain finally stopped that evening, leaving behind the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Nora parked outside a small two-story building that was supposedly the motel. The sign out front said, "Rooms by the night," though half the bulbs were dead, and the N kept flickering until it simply gave up. The manager was a thin man in his 60s with watery eyes and hands that trembled even when still. He barely looked at her ID before handing over a brass key attached to a wooden tag that read Room 3. Inside, the air was musty, old curtains, a single buzzing lamp, a crooked picture of a meadow. Nora dropped her bag and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her temples. Her phone showed no signal, not even Wi-Fi. She thought about driving back to the main highway, but something about the fatigue in her bones made her stay. There was an odd comfort in stillness, even when that stillness felt wrong. When she stepped back outside to stretch her legs, she saw the cemetery. It lay just across the road, fenced in by iron gates streaked with rust. The gravestones looked uneven, like teeth in a broken jaw, and even from a distance, she could tell the ground was freshly disturbed in several places. She assumed it was rain erosion, but part of her, some small, instinctual part, knew better. As she walked through town, she noticed that no one made eye contact for long. They were polite enough, but distant, like actors in a play that had gone on too long. The grocer kept forgetting what she'd just said. The post office clerk paused before answering simple questions, as if searching for memories that weren't there. And every person she met said the same line when conversation ran thin. "Enjoy your stay, miss. We don't get many passing through." That phrase echoed everywhere, at the gas station, at the old church with the broken bell. Even from the children who played near the square, their voices overlapping in a strange chorus. "We don't get many passing through." That night, she dreamt of shovels, not people digging, but shovels moving on their own, scraping, turning, burying something she couldn't see. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. When she woke up, her window was open, though she remembered locking it. Muddy footprints trailed from the sill to the foot of her bed, stopping inches from her suitcase. She went to the front desk, heart pounding. "Did someone come into my room last night?" she asked. The manager blinked slowly, confused. "Why would anyone do that, miss? No one's checked in here for weeks." She stared at him, waiting for a hint of humor. But he just looked lost, like he genuinely couldn't remember if there had been any other guests at all. Later that morning, she returned to the diner for breakfast. The same waitress served her coffee, hands trembling. Nora noticed scratches on her wrists, faint but recent. "Rough night?" Nora asked, forcing a small laugh. The woman's smile twitched. "I don't sleep much lately," she said. "Strange noises after dark." "What kind of noises?" The waitress hesitated, glancing toward the window again. "Digging," she whispered, "like someone turning the earth over and over. But the thing is, the cemetery's always full by morning. You can see the fresh mounds. Only the names—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Never mind. You shouldn't be here too long." Nora's stomach dropped. "What do you mean by that?" "Just leave before you forget who you are too." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly walked away, pretending to refill another customer's cup. By noon, the fog had rolled in again, thicker than before. The church bell rang, even though no one was inside. Nora followed the sound up the hill, where she saw the pastor standing among the graves. He was humming a slow hymn, his face pale as wax. When she greeted him, he turned too quickly, startled. "I didn't hear you approach," he said. She looked at the grave nearest to him. The name carved into the stone was faint, as if recently altered. The date of death was today. And underneath, the chiseled words seemed half-finished. "Nora Vale." Her blood went cold. "That's my name," she whispered. The pastor frowned, confused. "Is it?" He leaned closer, as though trying to read the inscription again, but the fog had already begun to thicken around them, swallowing the letters whole. "Strange," he muttered. "Sometimes the mist plays tricks." Nora backed away slowly, her shoes sinking into the damp earth. The graves around her seemed to pulse, shapes shifting subtly, names rearranging like handwriting on wet paper. She turned to leave, But something stopped her, a flicker of recognition. Every grave she passed had a name she didn't remember seeing before, yet, somehow, each one felt familiar. That night, she packed her things, ready to drive out of town. But when she started the car, the GPS flickered, showing only one route, a looping road that began and ended in Harlow's Bend. No matter which turn she took, she ended up back where she started. The cemetery waited quietly under the moonlight. By morning, the fog had lifted, but the cemetery looked different. Nora walked through the gate again, notebook in hand, determined to make sense of what she'd seen. Every grave that had once looked ancient now seemed newly carved. The soil was darker, moist, freshly turned. The air itself felt denser, as if carrying a weight too heavy to name. She knelt by the first stone she saw, a marble cross that leaned slightly left. Yesterday, it bore the name Catherine Miller. Today, it read Lydia Crane. Same date of birth, different death date, different person. She flipped through her notebook. She'd written it down last night. She was sure of it. Catherine Miller, 1921-1989. Now it said Lydia Crane, 1921-2024. That wasn't possible. Her phone, which had been useless for signal, still worked as a camera. She snapped photos, one by one, documenting each name, each headstone. There were dozens. Some had clean, perfect engraving. Others were smudged like wet paint. At the edge of the grounds, she found a half-buried headstone that looked older than the rest. The name on it had been scratched out entirely, replaced by what seemed like hurried etching. Do not remember. Nora's hands trembled. She'd seen vandalism before, sure, but this was different. There was intention behind it, a pattern that made no sense yet felt deliberate. Every night the graves changed, and if the waitress was right, the townspeople didn't or couldn't remember any of it. At the diner, Nora tried to talk to the waitress again, but the woman looked at her blankly. "Have we met?" she asked. Her voice was soft, empty. Nora froze. The same woman, same voice, same trembling hands, but no memory, no recognition at all. "Yesterday," Nora said quietly, "you told me about the noises, about the cemetery." The waitress frowned, searching for something that wouldn't come. "I think you've got me mixed up, sweetheart," she said, forcing a polite smile. "I've never been one for graveyards." That was when Nora realized it wasn't just the dead being forgotten. It was the living, too. The memories of whoever vanished were being wiped clean, replaced by silence. She started visiting every building she could, the library, the town hall, even the school. Most of them were empty or half-locked. In the library, she found something strange, a single ledger sitting open on a wooden desk. Its pages were filled with names written in looping, delicate handwriting. And at the bottom of each page, the ink grew darker, fresher, as if someone had added to it during the night. Her heart pounded when she reached the latest entry. Nora Vale arrived at dusk, to be remembered until dawn. She tore the page out, stuffed it into her coat, and ran. The librarian appeared from the shadows, her face pale and still. "You shouldn't take what isn't yours," she said. "It confuses the record." "What record?" Nora demanded. "What is this place?" The woman tilted her head like she was hearing a faraway sound. "A town that stays clean," she whispered. "A town that doesn't rot." Her eyes glistened, reflecting candlelight that wasn't there. The dead don't stay buried when they're remembered too much. So we forget. We have to. Nora stumbled backward, the torn page still clenched in her fist. Outside, the sky was bruised purple, the edges of the day bleeding into night. She looked around. The houses all seemed to lean inward now, the windows black, the air whispering her name in the rustle of the trees. She checked her phone again. The photos she'd taken of the graves were gone, every single one. The folder was empty. Her notebook, blank pages. Every word she'd written had disappeared, leaving only faint indents in the paper, like ghosts of thoughts that no longer existed. Panic set in. She rushed to her car, ready to leave for good this time. But when she turned the ignition, the engine roared to life, and the radio came on by itself. Static. Then a voice. Nora Vale. Buried before dawn. Her hands went cold. She turned off the engine, but the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, clearer, as if whispering directly into her ear. "We remember what you shouldn't. You've stayed too long." Nora stumbled out of the car, tripping over the gravel. The town was completely still now. Not a single curtain moved. Not a single light flickered. But in the distance, from the direction of the cemetery, she heard it again. The sound she'd dreamed of. Shovels. Hundreds of them, moving in rhythm, and in between each hollow scrape, the faint hum of voices reciting names, names that changed every time they were spoken. She ran until she reached the iron gates again, and that's when she saw it. Fresh earth, a single open grave, a headstone already waiting. It read, "Nora Vale, gone, but not forgotten." Except the last word was slowly changing, letter by letter, into something else. Nora Vale, gone and forgotten. That evening, Nora didn't leave. She knew she should have. Every rational thought screamed to drive. Walk, crawl away if needed. But something inside her refused to go. It wasn't courage. It was that strange, obsessive need people get when they're already half swallowed by a mystery. Once you've seen the edges of something impossible, you need to know what's on the other side, even if it kills you. She returned to the cemetery just before midnight, carrying a flashlight and her notebook. The fog had rolled back in, denser than before, blanketing the ground in silver mist. The air tasted metallic again, sharp, like rain before a storm. The gates groaned when she pushed them open, and for a moment she thought she heard a whisper slip through the air. Her own name, spoken softly, right behind her ear. She turned fast, but there was nothing there, just rows of crooked stones and shadows that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. At first, it was quiet, no sound but her own breathing and the faint buzz of insects. Then she heard it, the shovel sound, a slow, dragging scrape, then another, and another. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, dozens of shovels moving in perfect unison, somewhere beyond the fog. She followed the sound deeper, her light slicing through the mist. Her pulse quickened when she saw the ground begin to stir. Not violently, no hands breaking through the dirt, but subtle waves, like the soil was breathing. The graves were moving, sinking, then swelling again, as if the earth beneath them was rearranging itself. When she crouched to look closer, she saw the dirt folding inward, carving new shapes. Within seconds, a new headstone began to rise from the ground, smooth and unblemished. The engraving burned itself into the marble before her eyes. Caleb Jennings, 1975 to 2024. Then another. Mary Whitmore, 1983-2024. She whispered those names to herself. Neither rang a bell, but somewhere deep in her mind, something sparked, like she'd known them once, in another life. Maybe she'd spoken to them at the diner, seen them at the gas station. Maybe they'd been part of the town until last night. As she watched, the stones from the night before began to fade, the letters melting into smooth surfaces. The cemetery wasn't growing, it was cycling. Every name erased, replaced, rewritten like the turning of a page. Nora stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a small mound. The fog seemed to follow her, thick and deliberate. She turned her flashlight to the road, but the road was gone. All she could see in every direction was cemetery, endless rows, stretching beyond the horizon. She screamed into the fog, "Who's doing this?" And then, from the mist, a figure emerged. It wasn't a man or a woman, at least not anymore. It wore the shape of one, tall, thin, draped in tattered black clothing, but its face was blurred, as if seen through water. It carried a lantern in one hand and a spade in the other. Nora froze. "What are you?" The figure tilted its head. Its voice was soft, hollow. "Caretaker," it said. "Caretaker of what?" "The forgotten." It stepped closer, the lantern's light flickering over rows of graves. "You shouldn't have come back." Nora's voice trembled. "Why are you changing the names?" The caretaker paused, as if considering the question. "Because remembering hurts," it said finally. "And forgetting keeps the world clean." "That doesn't make sense," she said. "You're erasing people. You're—" "Restoring balance," it interrupted. "Too many memories. Too much grief. People cling to what's gone until it poisons everything. This town was the first to understand that. So, we keep it pure." The fog swirled around them like water in a drain. Nora realized the lantern light didn't cast shadows. It absorbed them. She saw faces flicker inside it, faint outlines of eyes and mouths pressing against the glass, screaming without sound. Her stomach twisted. "Those are people. They were," the caretaker said calmly. "Now, they're memories. Quiet ones." Nora stepped back, clutching her notebook. "You can't erase me," she said. "You can't make me disappear." The caretaker tilted its head again, almost pitying. "You already are." The words cut through her like cold water. She looked down and saw her hands trembling, but fading. The color drained first, then the shape, until her fingers looked translucent under the moonlight. She gasped, clutching her chest. Her heartbeat slowed, each pulse fainter than the last. But then, just as the fog thickened around her, she heard another voice, softer, familiar. "Nora." It was the waitress, standing at the gate, her face streaked with tears. "Come with me," she whispered, "before it's too late." The caretaker didn't move. "You can't save her," it said quietly. "Once written, the name stays." The waitress raised a trembling hand, holding a candle that flickered wildly in the wind. "You don't decide who's remembered," she hissed. "Not any more." She threw the candle toward the caretaker. It hit the ground, and for the first time, the fog reacted, curling away from the flame like a living thing recoiling from fire. The air filled with whispers, thousands of voices murmuring Nora's name, as if calling her back. The ground beneath her feet split open, revealing roots, bones, and fragments of paper, all covered in ink. She realized what she was standing on wasn't soil, it was words. The town was built on forgotten names, layer after layer of erased lives, and she was next. The fire from the candle sputtered, then died in the damp wind. But it had been enough. The fog loosened its grip just enough for Nora and the waitress to run. They sprinted through the cemetery gate and down the slope, lungs burning, until the ground turned from soil to gravel and finally to asphalt. The town reappeared slowly through the haze, but it didn't feel like the same place anymore. Streetlights flickered, buildings leaned closer together, and the windows of every home stared blankly out into the mist, like eyes that had forgotten how to blink. The waitress led her into the church, bolting the heavy door behind them. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of melted wax and damp stone. Candles lit the pews in uneven lines, hundreds of them, each one labeled with a name. "Every candle," the waitress whispered, "is a memory. We light them for those the caretaker takes away. It's the only way to keep them alive, even if no one else remembers." Nora's chest tightened. "So, you do remember?" "Not always. Not fully," the woman said. "But sometimes a flicker comes back. A sound, a name, a face. When it does, I light a candle before it fades again." Nora looked at the endless rows of small flames, their light trembling in the still air. "How long has this been happening?" The waitress sighed. "Since before any of us were born, before the town had a name." She motioned toward a dusty mural painted along the back wall, half faded with time. It showed a storm, a flood swallowing the valley, and people kneeling in prayer before a cloaked figure holding a lantern. Beneath the image, words carved in Latin read, "To be cleansed of the sorrow of memory." The waitress continued, "Harlow's Bend was founded after a disaster no one speaks about. Some say a plague, some say war, others something worse. The first settlers made a vow. They prayed for peace, for the end of pain and grief, and something answered." Nora stepped closer to the mural. The figure with the lantern, the caretaker, had eyes that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. The artist had painted them with such detail it almost looked alive. "They asked to forget," Nora murmured. "They did," the waitress replied. "And they got their wish. Every sorrow, every loss, every death erased from memory. But the cost was steep. Once the world forgets a name, it needs to take another in return. That's how the town stays clean, balanced, as the caretaker calls it." Nora shuddered. "That's not balance. That's slaughter." "Maybe," the waitress said softly, "but you can't convince people who don't remember that something's wrong. The forgetting rewrites everything, the past, the records, even who people think they are. You could live here your whole life and never realize your neighbor disappeared last night." Nora's eyes darted back to the mural. "Then, how do you know?" The waitress hesitated, her eyes glistening. "Because I used to be one of them," she whispered. "My name was Mary Whitmore." Nora's stomach dropped. She remembered the headstone she'd seen appear the night before. "I saw your grave," she said. "It said you died this year." The woman nodded. "I did. Or I was supposed to. But something went wrong. The fog didn't take me completely. I woke up before they finished the burying. When I crawled out, no one remembered me. Not my husband. Not my son. It was like I never existed." Her voice cracked, trembling with the weight of years of silence. "I've been hiding ever since, trying to keep the candles burning." Nora's hands shook. "There has to be a way to stop it." The waitress smiled faintly, but it was a sad, tired smile. "Maybe, but you'd have to destroy the memory root." "The what?" She pointed to a trapdoor beneath the altar. "It's under there, the old town tree. Its roots grew deep, right into the soil of the dead. It's where the forgetting began. The caretaker guards it because it holds every erased name. If it's cut, the town remembers everything at once." Nora swallowed hard. "Then let's do it." The waitress shook her head. "You don't understand. Remembering kills, too. You think grief disappears when it's buried. But it just waits. If the root is destroyed, every sorrow this town ever erased will come rushing back. Every memory, every death. It'll drown everyone who's still here." For a long moment, neither spoke. The candles flickered as though breathing. Nora finally said, "Then maybe that's what they deserve." The waitress looked at her, eyes full of quiet horror and admiration. "You sound like someone who still remembers what loss feels like," she said softly. "That's rare here." She reached into her pocket and handed Nora a small brass key. "If you really mean to go through with it, this opens the door beneath the altar. But once you step down there, you'll see what no one else dares to remember." Nora turned the key over in her palm. It was cold, heavier than it should have been, engraved with words she couldn't quite read. The metal pulsed faintly with warmth, like it was alive. She slipped it into her coat. "Then I guess it's time someone remembered." Outside, the fog pressed against the stained glass windows, wrapping the church in a slow, suffocating grip. The candles flickered harder, their light dancing across the faces painted on the mural. The lantern figure watching, always watching. And somewhere deep below, under the roots of the town, something began to stir. The trapdoor creaked open with a sound that echoed through the church like a sigh. The scent that rose from the darkness wasn't rot or decay. It was damp earth, old wood, and something faintly sweet, like wilted flowers. Nora hesitated for only a second before taking the first step down. The brass key still burned faintly in her pocket. The staircase spiraled downward, carved from stone slick with condensation. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. No wind, no church bells, no sound of rain, only her breathing and the soft drip of water somewhere far below. When she reached the bottom, she found herself in a vast cavern lit by faint bioluminescent roots crawling along the walls. They pulsed gently, like veins beneath translucent skin. The air was heavy, humid, alive. In the center of the chamber stood an enormous tree, its bark pale as bone, its roots stretching outward in every direction like skeletal arms. Nora's breath caught in her throat. The tree wasn't growing from the earth. It was growing through it, feeding on something buried beneath. The soil around its base was littered with fragments of stone, broken crosses, and what looked like human bones tangled among the roots. This was the heart of Harlow's Bend, the memory root. She stepped closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The closer she got, the more she could hear them. Voices, countless voices whispering from within the roots. Some were crying, others murmuring words too faint to understand. It sounded like 1,000 people speaking in their sleep, trapped somewhere between remembering and forgetting. She reached out, brushing her fingers against the bark. It was warm, like skin, and beneath it she could feel something move. A heartbeat. A soft light flickered behind her. When she turned, the caretaker was there, lantern glowing faintly, its face still blurred by the shifting air. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. Nora raised her flashlight. "You erase people. You steal them." "I release them," the caretaker corrected. "You don't understand. The dead aren't meant to be remembered. Memory traps them, binds them. The tree keeps their sorrow quiet. The living forget, and the world moves on. Peace restored." "That's not peace," she snapped. "That's emptiness." The caretaker tilted its head. "And yet, emptiness is kinder than pain." It stepped aside, revealing the root's core, a gnarled mass of dark fibers wrapped around something gleaming. Nora squinted. It was metal. A bell, old and rusted, embedded deep within the wood, the same symbol she'd seen on the church mural. She suddenly understood. The town's church bell hadn't rung in decades, because it wasn't in the tower anymore. It had been buried, swallowed by the tree itself, a piece of the world's memory stolen and hidden away. "What happens if I break it?" she asked quietly. The caretaker's voice softened. "Then everything returns. Every death, every grief, every name. You'll bring back centuries of mourning in one breath. You'll drown them all." Nora took a step closer. "Maybe it's time the town remembered what it did to survive." The caretaker didn't move. "And what of you, Nora Vale? You think your memories are clean? You came here for a reason. You always do." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You've been to Harlow's Bend before," it said. "You just forgot." The air seemed to tighten around her. Images flashed in her mind. Mud, fog, headlights, the feeling of falling asleep behind the wheel. Then, nothing. "I died," she whispered. The caretaker nodded slowly. "Years ago. You were buried here. Your grave was rewritten when you came too close to remembering. The town forgot you, as it was meant to, until now." Nora stepped back, dizzy. The walls pulsed. The roots whispered louder. Her name echoed among the voices. "Nora Vale, Nora Vale, Nora Vale." She shook her head. "No, I'm alive." "Memory makes you alive," the caretaker said. "When no one remembers you, you fade. That's what you've been feeling. You're not here to save the town. You're here because it's trying to finish what it started." Nora looked at the bell again. Her reflection trembled in its corroded surface, a ghost of a woman who shouldn't exist. She gripped the flashlight tighter. "Then I guess I'll take them with me." The caretaker's expression softened, almost mournful. "You'll doom them all." She raised the flashlight and swung it hard. The metal cracked against the bell. A sound burst through the cavern, a deep, trembling hum that rattled her bones. The roots convulsed, twisting violently. The walls shook. Candles far above in the church flickered out all at once. The voices screamed, not from fear, but release. The air filled with names, hundreds of them, thousands, echoing up through the earth, through the streets, through every house in Harlow's Bend. Outside, the townspeople woke from sleep with gasps, clutching their heads as memories poured back like floodwater. Faces of lost loved ones, names of the dead, decades of grief they hadn't known they carried, all returning in an instant. Nora fell to her knees, her ears ringing. The caretaker staggered backward, its form flickering between shadow and light. "You don't understand," it said. "They'll break beneath it. Then at least they'll know they're alive," she whispered. The tree split open down the center, sap pouring out like blood. The bell fell free, shattering on the cavern floor. The whispering stopped. For the first time, there was silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. The last thing Nora heard before the darkness took her was her own name, spoken softly, reverently, from 1,000 voices above ground. "We remember you, Nora Vale." Morning came quietly, like it was afraid to disturb what had happened. The fog had lifted, the air was still, and the sky was a pale, uncertain blue. The town of Harlow's Bend looked ordinary again, too ordinary. The kind of morning where you'd expect to hear birds, the hum of traffic, the sound of people starting their day. But there was only silence. The first to step outside was the grocer, an old man with cloudy eyes. He stood on his porch, rubbing his temples. His hands trembled as he looked toward the cemetery in the distance. It was larger now, far larger. The ground stretched wider than it had the day before, covered in uneven mounds and crooked stones. The gates hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Names covered every inch of the hillside, some carved deep and clean, others scratched, overlapping, written in panic. Names that hadn't been spoken in decades. The townspeople gathered slowly at the gates, drawn there without knowing why. Mothers clutched their children. Men removed their hats. Someone whispered, "I remember him." Then another voice, "She was my sister." It spread like wildfire, realization, grief, remembrance, tears, confusion, apologies spoken to graves long forgotten. The weight of generations came crashing down all at once. Inside the church, the candles that had been burning through the night were gone. In their place, puddles of wax and ash covered the pews. The mural behind the altar had changed too. The storm was gone. The caretaker's face, once hidden in shadow, now looked human, tired, ancient, almost peaceful. But the lantern was empty. The trapdoor beneath the altar was sealed shut, as if it had never been opened. No one who looked at it could quite remember what lay below, only that something there had been important, something that mattered. The waitress, Mary Whitmore again, now fully herself, walked to the edge of the cemetery. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face was calm. In her hand she held a small brass key. It was warm to the touch, faintly pulsing. She knelt before a grave near the front, one with a name freshly carved into the stone. Nora Vale, she remembered. Mary smiled through her tears. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought them back." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain and soil. For a brief moment, she swore she heard footsteps behind her, soft, deliberate, familiar. But when she turned, there was no one there, only the long rows of graves, their names whispering faintly as the wind passed through. Later that day, the townspeople gathered in the square. No one knew exactly what had happened, but everyone felt it. A heaviness that couldn't be explained by weather or worry. They remembered their dead, their families, their mistakes. The town wasn't clean anymore. It was full of pain, but it was real. And for the first time in anyone's memory, the bell in the church tower rang. Once, twice, 3 times, its echo rolled through the valley like a heartbeat. At the edge of town, the motel stood empty. Room 3's door hung open, curtain fluttering gently. On the nightstand was Nora's notebook, filled again, every page inked with names, memories, and small fragments of her handwriting. The last line simply read, "Remember them, remember me." And though the pages had been wet with rain, the ink never smudged. That night, the stars came out brighter than anyone in Harlow's Bend could remember. The town slept uneasily, but it did sleep, without the fog, without the forgetting. Children dreamed of faces they'd never met, but somehow knew. The adults woke with tears on their cheeks, uncertain whether they were mourning or healing. Mary lit one final candle inside the church. Its flame was steady, golden, alive. She whispered a prayer, not to forget, but to endure. As she turned to leave, she caught one last glimpse of the mural. The caretaker was gone. Only the lantern remained, hanging empty, its light passed on. And deep below the earth, where the memory root once pulsed, something new had begun to grow, not twisted or pale, but green, living. Maybe remembrance didn't have to destroy. Maybe it could finally let them live. In the weeks that followed, the town of Harlow's Bend became something of a curiosity, not in the tourist brochure sense, but in that quiet way. Journalists, historians, and curious travelers start whispering about a place they can't quite locate on any modern map. The first mention appeared online, a brief post in a local genealogy forum. Someone claimed they'd found a cemetery in rural Pennsylvania where the headstones seemed newly carved, even though the graves dated back hundreds of years. The user attached a few blurry photos before the post was deleted. No one could contact them again. Then came the rumors. Locals from neighboring towns started talking about how they'd always known of a bend in the valley, a patch of fog that never cleared, a place their parents told them to avoid after dark. Truckers swore their GPS systems would glitch when driving through the area, looping endlessly between coordinates that didn't exist. But when a small investigative team from a regional newspaper finally went looking for Harlow's Bend, they found something that didn't make sense. The roads described by residents led only to thick forest and an old, cracked sign buried half in the dirt. The lettering was faint, but under the moss you could still read it. Harlow's Bend, a quiet place to rest. The journalists said they walked for hours, hearing what they described as soft voices in the trees. One claimed his camera recorded whispering even when no one spoke. Another reported finding a single headstone deep in the woods, clean, new, engraved with a name that didn't appear in any local death records. Nora Vale, she remembered. When they returned to town, every photo on their cameras had vanished, just static, noise, or blank frames filled with mist. Their notebooks were still legible, but the words they'd written about Harlow's Bend were scrambled, names, dates, and entire sentences replaced by nonsense. Within weeks, the paper dropped the story. No official report was published. The editor claimed the writers had suffered technical issues and fatigue. Both journalists left their jobs soon after, moving out of state. One of them, years later, told a podcaster that she sometimes woke up at night to the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. 3 times. Always 3. The land where Harlow's Bend supposedly stood is now overgrown. Locals call it the Hollow, a place where compasses spin and cell phones die. Hikers report finding candle stubs melted into the soil, names etched on tree bark, and once a brass key buried beneath the roots of a dead oak. The same key Mary once held. Authorities dismissed the reports as superstition, a case of rural folklore getting out of hand. But deep in regional archives, there's still a section labeled Harlow's Parish Records, 1884 to 1910. Most of the pages are blank. The ink faded, except for one note written in the margin in unfamiliar handwriting. We keep the world clean by forgetting, but some names remember themselves. Those who've heard the story say the curse never truly ended. The town may have vanished, but the forgetting didn't die. It moved. They say it follows sorrow like a shadow, searching for places heavy with grief, feeding quietly. Sometimes, when someone disappears and no one seems to remember them, people whisper that Harlow's Bend found them. And every so often, a new name appears online, an obituary for someone who was never born, a record that shouldn't exist, a stranger's face in an old photograph captioned simply, "Gone, but not forgotten." No one knows who keeps posting them. But some say, if you trace the digital trail far enough, every account leads back to one email address, an old one, inactive for years. Nora Vale Harlow's Bend. Org, it's strange how memory works, isn't it? We trust it like a friend, even though it betrays us every day. Faces blur, voices fade, and entire years collapse into a few fragile moments we carry inside our heads. But what if forgetting isn't an accident? What if it's a kind of mercy, carefully designed to keep us from breaking under the weight of what we've lost? That's what they believed in Harlow's Bend, that to remember was to suffer, to erase the past was to heal. But maybe they got it backward. Maybe the pain of memory is the proof that we lived, that something once mattered enough to hurt. Without it, what are we but empty pages waiting to be rewritten? People say Nora Vale destroyed the root, but no one agrees on what happened to her afterward. Some claim she was buried again, finally at peace. Others think she became part of the wind that moves through the valley, whispering the names of the forgotten to anyone who listens closely enough. And there are a few who say she's still out there, traveling from town to town, lighting candles in old churches, leaving notes in abandoned motels, small reminders that grief is not the enemy, that remembering is an act of love. Every year, someone finds a brass key on a doorstep. Sometimes it's wrapped in paper with a single word written on it. Remember, no one knows where they come from. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the world doesn't need to know the whole story of Harlow's Bend, only that once a forgotten woman refused to let the dead stay silent. And because of her, somewhere out there, a name you thought you'd lost might just be whispering itself back into your dreams. So, if you ever find yourself driving a lonely road on a rainy night, and you see a sign half buried in the dirt that says, "Welcome to Harlow's Bend," a quiet place to rest, don't stop. Keep driving. Don't look back, because the moment you remember, it might start remembering you. Maybe the scariest thing about this story isn't the fog, or the graves, or even the caretaker. Maybe it's how easy it is to forget, how fragile our lives really are when memory is the only thing holding them together. We live our whole lives collecting moments, faces, stories, hoping someone will remember us kindly when we're gone. But the truth is, most names fade long before the stone that marks them. Maybe that's why legends like Harlow's Bend stick with us, because deep down, we're all afraid of being erased. And maybe Nora Vale wasn't a ghost or a savior. Maybe she was just like the rest of us, someone who couldn't stand the thought of being forgotten, someone who believed that even pain is better than silence. So, if you ever find yourself dreaming of a place that doesn't appear on any map, a town that feels too quiet, a church with candles that never seem to go out, remember her name. Whisper it once. Nora Vale. Because remembering is the only thing that keeps the darkness from taking everything else. If you enjoyed tonight's story and want to hear more mysteries like this one, make sure you subscribe to Last Seen and turn on notifications. I'm creating a special Halloween week of horror stories, each one more chilling than the last. And who knows, maybe one of them will remember you.